Hi everyone, this is Roshni and I'm currently a product lead at Amazon, and I'm going to do a quick presentation on getting hired as a product manager. I know during these times it's even harder to get a product manager job, and so I'm hoping whatever I present in this presentation at least shed some light as to what's happening in the background. Who am I? I'm currently a product lead, as I mentioned. I manage a very large internal product that's essentially just customer lifetime value on steroids. Most of the members in my team are economists and engineers, so it's a very, very technical product, which has its downsides and upsides, because you can go in front of customers and say something that may not necessarily be fully accurate, and then you get dinged for that. So there's lots of pluses and minuses to being a product lead. In the past, I was a financial analyst and then a data scientist, which I mostly did because I wanted to earn more money, and data science does pay quite well. And so I'm one of those people who didn't traditionally go through computer science or was a product manager beforehand before getting into product. The one thing that I did have going for me was that my past experience before my MBA was also at Amazon, and so going back was a little bit easier. I alluded to this before. I don't have a computer science undergrad. I have a bachelor's in biochemistry and biophysics because at one point in time I wanted to be a doctor, which obviously didn't pan out. And then I also have a master's in financial engineering because in 2010, 2011, 2012 time frame, investment banking was the thing. I interned at JP Morgan and I didn't like it, and so I left that. I joined Amazon as a financial analyst, switched to data science, and then decided to get my MBA because I wanted to learn how to think really big and truly wanted to understand what influence really means, which I can talk about more later. But I went, loved it, and graduated in 2018, and still keep in touch with a lot of my friends. On the fun side, I used to be an amateur boxer. If you type my name, you'll see my name show up in some of the Philly newspapers. I did it while at Wharton. And I also do stand-up comedy. Not so much now because of COVID, but I used to do it very actively a couple times a week, just about a couple months ago. More specifically for the audience, I have conducted over 60 full-time PM interviews for Amazon. And so by this point, I can tell what are some of the biggest mistakes that interviewees make and what I have seen in general in trends. So today there's a couple things we're going to cover. One of the biggest things are what does a PM do, because it can really be anything. And then how to transition from a different background. I'll walk through some of my experiences, some of the experiences that I've seen from others in the interview process and from my own friends. And then what do top companies actually look for as a product manager? And then specifically, which I know that a lot of people will want to know about, is how do you rock your interview? Like, what are they looking for? Like, what are some tips to get better? The last portion is especially great because I have both rocked and terribly failed product management interviews. And so I can tell from experience what I've done incorrectly and then what I've done correctly that's helped me get product interviews and get offers. Also, the slides will have quite a few comics because, I'm trying to keep it light. But the first section is mostly just going to be what does a PM do? So a PM's job responsibilities can differ based off of what type of PM. So the PM can stand for program, product, project. I've seen it stand for multiple different things. There's also technical versions of a PM. And those differences can influence what your actual responsibilities are. What company you're in and the size of the company, the industry that it's in can also make a big difference. I'm guessing most of the audience today really cares about big tech, maybe some startups. I have experience interviewing with both and getting offers from both. And so I can bring in the startup viewpoint as much as possible. And then the type of product also makes a huge difference. For example, if you are in a central product like I am, where we are internal and we service the whole company with whatever we're building out, the type of responsibilities you have, especially if it's technical, is very different from if you are, let's say, a product manager for Facebook Messenger. The type of stuff you're going to do is super dependent on the type of product you have and whether it's internal or external customer facing. But, you know, taking all of that aside and just focusing on a product manager, technical product manager, you know, all the different types of product managers that there are, and shying away from project and program, just on the FAANG portion of it, a product manager in general is responsible for building the vision of where a product is going to go. This can break down into growth versus farmer PMs. Growth PMs are the ones who work on brand new ideas and build out the vision and the strategy for launching a brand new product. Farmer PMs work on established products and work to either maintain the current path that the product is going on or make incremental smaller improvements. Obviously, you know, no one really works on like these divergent each sides of the spectrum. Most PM jobs are somewhere in between, with some trending more towards growth versus other more towards farmer. My team specifically, because the product that I'm working on was brand new when I joined, I got to do a lot of growth stuff instead of the farmer stuff. But now that my product is becoming more and more established, it's turning into more of the farmer stuff. But vision building, overall strategy, and how the pieces fit together. So strategy can have multiple different definitions. But what I mean here is being able to see where your product fits into the whole ecosystem of products that it may be, and where it falls in the overall company vision and strategy. Being able to really think about that and piece that out is one of the core strengths of a product manager. Another thing that frequently also comes up, and you know, more junior product managers may weigh in on this, is prioritization of features. Because product managers are the primary point of contact for customers to send in their requests, and then those requests get translated into whatever features that may be built for your product, regardless of whether it's internal or external. Prioritization is something that product managers usually weigh in on. Because here, knowing how all of the pieces fit together and knowing what customers want is very useful. Outside of that, product managers can also have several different functions depending on which company they're in. Like for Amazon, a lot of product managers do stakeholder management, where if they're delivering a very large product, they'll also coordinate the 90, 100+ stakeholders that may be there. This is more rare, you know, having to coordinate so many stakeholders, but there is quite a bit of stakeholder management that needs to be done as a product manager. In very large established teams, you'll find that usually the program manager does a lot of the coordination, whereas the product manager is much more focused on thinking big and the vision and the strategy. But in smaller teams, you can wear multiple hats. Another thing that can also happen as you get more and more senior is you become the go-to person for leadership to ask questions to that are very overarching. Like for example, I am working on a project that has an SVP sponsor. And so as the product lead, I get to send out emails to this SVP sponsor saying, hey, here's where we are. Whenever we are in presentations, I'm the one that presents on what's happening. He asks me the questions. And even at the director level, down from, you know, the senior vice president, usually they just send me the emails as to like, how should they think about this? How should they think about that? Like, how will this fit into the picture of where my project is going? And so that is also one of the great perks of being a product manager, is that you can get high visibility. But, you know, taking all of this aside, this is very tactical. The biggest difference between a junior and a senior PM, as I've gone from being a junior to a senior PM, outside of scope, is how you get things done. the ambiguity of the problem that you're solving, and how many people you develop along the way, which kind of goes back into how you get things done. You'll find that junior PMs a lot kind of struggle with influence, and influence can have many different definitions, but here it's mostly trying to get everybody to go towards a combined vision. Junior PMs will rely more on either senior PMs or their managers to make the connection with teams that they may need to reach out to get their product delivered, whereas senior PMs just form the connections themselves and influence PMs in other teams to help them out without having any sort of like managerial escalations or getting leadership involved. On top of that, senior PMs are also very good at establishing mechanisms to keep a project running without them having to jump in every single day. You'll find that junior PMs are much more hands-on when they're trying to deliver a product, whereas senior PMs will just like get really good at establishing mechanisms and then just take a step back and then work on several other different large projects. And that's actually one of the best ways to expand scope, is through really good mechanisms. Another big difference is the ambiguity, as I mentioned. As you go up higher and higher, the ambiguity of the problem that you're solving will just increase. One of the problems that I'm working on, when I first started working on it, I didn't even really know where to start. But if I didn't have the experience of being more junior, I would have just like been kind of lost in the weeds. But being able to take a step back and scope the problem is one of the big things that even companies look for in a senior PMs that I'll talk about later on. And developing people is super important, which I don't really, I think, need to state as much, but because you indirectly manage people as a PM, being able to develop them, give them feedback, get them to trust you, and give you updates and feel empowered enough to take decisions on their own, also separates a junior from a senior. Okay, so transitioning from a different background is going to be my couple favorite slides, because I did a couple crazy things that I'll give as examples. So as you may know, product jobs, for some really weird reason, have very artificially high, I think, barriers to entry, where you need to have PM experience in order to even get an interview as a PM. And then when you're doing the interview, it's all dependent on like your previous experience, how you think about a specific problem, your likability, your ability to earn trust. It's all very fluffy. And I feel like a lot of the requirements seem kind of unfair. But to get around, this unfairness, one of the biggest mistakes that I see people making when trying to switch into product is targeting a very, very narrow role at a very specific company. I get a lot of LinkedIn requests with messages saying, can I get your help in figuring out how to move to product at Amazon? Because I really want to work at Amazon, and I really want to do product management, and I really want to do technical product management. But then this person will not have any technical skills, will not have any previous PMing skills, and so they're just never going to be considered. Like when I've reviewed resumes, like if someone doesn't have any PM background, it will be very difficult for me to make a case to interview them, because PMs have so much riding on the delivery of the product that having previous PM experience is super, super needed. And so taking that into account, some of the ways that you can transition, I mean, of course, there are people who have gotten PM experience or have just gotten PM jobs without any previous PM experience. That's a very small minority. And so I'm going to focus on the majority of us who do need to have PM experience to get PM jobs, is transition to product within your current company. So let's say right now you're a data analyst and you really want to try PMing. The best way to get the PM experience is to do it within your own company. And you don't necessarily need to get the PM title to get the PM experience. You can just talk to your manager and say, hey, can I do this or this product, and then start doing half-time, and then transition to doing full-time PM. That way, you're not hit in the face with all the responsibilities that a PM has. Another thing that you can do is join a company when you're joining a company, join in a role that's similar to the one you used to have, and then transition. So instead of transitioning in your previous company here, what I'm saying is you'll transition in the company that you're interviewing for. Like for example, when I wanted to transition to PM before my MBA, I started interviewing for positions as a data scientist at other tech companies. And then I got a couple offers and was, during the interview process, I talked about, what is it like to try to transition to other roles. And a lot of tech, and especially big tech, were super open to letting candidates, once they join and work in the team for a year or so, to try out other roles. And so that was something that I considered at one point in time as well. Another thing that's, I think, what most people will say is referrals. I think referrals it depends on the company how useful they are. I found that at Google and Facebook and a couple startups, referrals are super, super important. My friends have referred me to Google and Facebook, and they have kept in touch with me. The recruiters have kept in touch with me and brought in my referrer every step of the way to see how I'm doing. And so it's very different at Amazon, where a referral may or may not get you an interview. It'll definitely get you noticed if the hiring manager is super involved in the hiring process, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the recruiter is ever going to reach out. Another more expensive option is to just do grad school, which is something that I did, but for me, it wasn't so much about getting into product. It was much more about the softer skills and thinking about what it is that I really wanted to do. But I found that getting the MBA was very helpful for my classmates who didn't have any tech or technical experience or any previous PM experience. So there's a couple ways that I approached PM recruiting when I was in grad school and before grad school as well. So I'm not going to name the companies that I did it with, but I was trying to give PM a shot without transitioning at Amazon to a PM. And so what I started doing was I reached out to people on LinkedIn, but I did it in a very specific way. I find that most people, when they reach out to contacts on LinkedIn, they just either don't put a note, which is terrible because I would never accept that request, or they put a note with an immediate ask, something like, oh, can we chat for a couple minutes to talk about what being a PM is, or can you review my resume, which is a lot, especially reviewing your resume is a lot to ask for when you don't even know the person. But what I did was I reached out, and in my note, what I would write is, hey, I noticed that you work here, and I'm super interested in working at, X company. And I was just thinking through some of the ways that this company could grow, and here's some of the ideas that I was thinking about. And I would love to get your feedback on how I'm thinking about this, and if this is the right way to think about how the product strategy for X company. And it seems, kind of bold and I'm spending a lot of time, but it actually worked out really well. A lot of people appreciated the amount of thought I put in, and I also made it short enough that it wasn't this long rambling paragraph, a bunch of paragraphs. And I just said, I'm thinking about it this way, am I wrong about this? Am I right about this? And I actually learned about product a lot by going through this process. And it is a little bit more time consuming, but it has a higher hit rate, and it is a very different way of approaching things. Another thing that I did, and I will state this company, is when I reached out to Spotify and I reached out to the recruiter at Spotify, I said, hey, I was just thinking about ways that you could redesign the Spotify UI, thinking through what are the pain points that I have right now. And I just did a simple paint drawing with Justin Bieber at one of the points. It was very odd. And she actually sent it to one of the product managers who thought it was hilarious. And then he reached out to me, and we got a conversation going. They didn't have any openings at that point, but I was able to form a really good connection that way. And so using humor and a different way of approaching really helped me. The more expensive option, of course, is to go get the MBA. or another grad degree that can help transition to product. And what you can do here is right when you enter, you can work with career services because they'll have many, many contacts, especially if you go to a prestigious MBA that has a very large class size every year. You'll have a lot of people who are in multiple different fields. And you know, taking that into account, it's also very important that you attend a grad school that does have a very good career service and has high tech placement. So Wharton is good for this. Berkeley is great for this. Something like Stanford is great for this. Stanford is much more about like, you know, starting your own company. But Wharton, for example, I think when I was there, had about 30 to 35% of people going into tech. And so there was very large network that we could rely on through tech services or just reach out through on LinkedIn or through alumni services to get help. And so those are a couple of the ways that helped. For grad school, this was very helpful when I reached out to Snapchat because a Wharton alum used to work there, and so I said, hey, I'm a current Wharton grad or a Wharton student looking to see, like, you know, if Snapchat is a good fit. And everyone always wants to talk to students to like give them advice on how to think about things, and so this was a very great option for me as well. But specifically what companies look for in a resume is experience. As I mentioned, you need PM experience to get a PM job in a new company. Transitioning is always an option, or, you know, getting the MBA is always an option. Another thing that really matters is the impact of the role. When leveling and trying to figure out whether you're a junior or senior PM, the best way to do that in your resume is through the number of customers that you've impacted, the dollars that you've driven, the number of people that you've led. Cross-functional impact is a buzzword that's thrown around, but it is actually very, very important. Being able to get through multiple different job roles aligned on a vision is a very hard skill to find. The results that you've achieved are also very, very important because at the end of the day, a PM, whether as they move up, a lot of it is just based off of results and how they achieve the results. Like how many bridges did they burn along the way? How many people did they develop? Something that's very understated that I think more people should do is in your resume, all of it should tie towards a greater story. What is your overarching story? Like a lot of times I find bullet points that are literally just job descriptions, and it doesn't tell me what the candidate has done. It just tells me what their job description said. And that's not great. Like if you're building out, if your overarching story is that you're very analytical, then having bullet points that show that you are analytical will build that overarching story. If you're building out, if your overarching story is that you're very creative, then either coming up with ideas that got funded, that were a very different way of looking at things than what you're originally doing, or working with designers or working with more creative people, that would be what your bullet points would be around. Obviously, not everyone can have an overarching story, so you can also have multiple, like 1 or 2, 3 stories in one resume, but not going towards an overarching story or set of stories is one of the biggest mistakes that I see PMs make, or those who want to be PMs. Another thing that I think stops a lot of PMs is that they don't have technical experience. As you may know, there are different types of PMs. There's technical PMs, there's non-tech PMs. So some technical experience is great, but it's not required. The great thing, so the reason why having at least some technical experience is helpful in a PM role, whether tech or non-tech, is that it stops you from coming up with ideas that are just totally out there and not at all reasonable. It also makes it easier to understand if engineering or science is about to do something that's totally wrong. Like it'll help you at least at a high level catch all of the blockers that may come up by going through one solution rather than another. And that's why some technical experience is great. I found that just taking like intro to programming courses is super helpful. There's a course that's called Python for Everybody that's also very helpful. I myself, when I was trying to develop technical skills, even though I did a lot of programming in my master's, I just took some Coursera skills, some Coursera courses, some EDX courses, and learned Java and Python well enough to get a data scientist job. And so that has been very helpful. And then finally, being able to solve problems is something that they will test for in the interview process, which I'll walk through later, but that is also something that companies look for. This section just goes through how to make compelling bullet points. Just like at a high level, you know, talking about quantifying what it is that you did is very important. I'm sure you've heard that. There's several different examples that I've listed here. The slides will be shared as well, so you can take a look. But the biggest feedback that I receive is, okay, what if I can't quantify my experience? You can still write compelling bullet points. So let's just say that you develop training materials for launching a program. There's a much better way to write that. So if you look at example 2, you can change that and say, okay, you design and build training materials for whatever program that was viewed so many times and had such a high evaluation rate, and that's been translated into this and this and this. And so that is much more compelling than just developing training bullets. As you can see, one is literally just what is written on the job description. The second is what you did and what was the special sauce that you added that made it great. This is just something that I put in there. These are questions that I receive as well as to how companies decide whether you're really worth pursuing in terms of the salary that they provide or the benefits that they provide versus, you know, you're just kind of like you're good enough to get into the company but not worth pursuing. And that's separating the top 10% to the top 1% to the top 50%. I'm just going to focus on the top 1 and the top 10. One of the biggest differences, and you'll see a lot of this written in Ian McAllister's post on Quora, which has gotten a lot of attention. Ian McAllister is actually somebody that I worked with when I was at Amazon the first time, and he's great as a product leader. And so I've definitely read that link when you get the chance. But some of the biggest differences are the ability to think really big and not necessarily be lost in the weeds. Product managers especially are supposed to be the pipeline of ideas for most companies, outside of engineers, of course, for most tech companies. And so the ability to think big is super important. Communication is also very important. I know this is something that comes up a lot, but being able to communicate in a way that earns trust and is concise and answers the question is a very rare skill. Most people struggle with verbal communication where they ramble on or they say things that don't necessarily tie to an overarching story. And that's the part that, you know, most people can improve on. The influence that you get, how you get things done, as I mentioned before, that is also what differentiates a top 1% from a top 10%. A top 1% can get things done faster using the relationships that they've already built or making a case for why something should happen over another. Being able to pitch ideas and get it prioritized over other ideas is also something that's a big differentiator between a top 1% and a top 10%. Simplifying complex problems comes back down to problem solving, and this is something that will be checked for during the interview process, but being able to simplify and look through the weeds and just get through what the actual problem is also a really great skill that top 1%ers have, and then prioritize, of course. So this section, this is the last section, is just going to go through some of the best practices for PM interviewing. This is based off of the PM interviews that I've failed and the ones that I've succeeded in, along with things that I've seen as an interviewer for interviewees. Be concise. Make sure that when an interviewer asks a question, it's okay to take just a couple seconds, take a deep breath, and think about what it is that you're going to try to say in the next 1 to 2 minutes. What I find is that because interviewees are so nervous, they just start rambling, and it's literally a verbal vomit for like the first 30 seconds, and then they take a step back and they're like, okay, wait. Just do that give yourself a break, do that in the first couple of seconds, and then go. It's also okay if you get asked a product sense question to take a minute and think about what it is that you want to answer, and then develop all the ways that your answer could go. Have 4 to 5 really good examples of either ideating or delivering a product. Let's say you don't have PM experience. You can still have really good examples of this. You just have to spin it in a different way. But just 4 to 5 is really great, is good enough for most interviews. And that'll get you through like 4 or 5 people loops, because you can talk about different aspects of the 4 to 5 examples that you have for any question that an interviewer will ask you. It's also easier to remember that way, or else if you have multiple different small stories, it's a nightmare to remember. Product questions, the whole point of a product question is to scope the ambiguity of the question, because as I mentioned, really good PMs, senior PMs are very good at scoping ambiguity. And so, for example, when I ask a question like, design a product, I keep it ambiguous for a reason, just to see if you just like jump into saying, well, I've always thought about creating this product for this industry. Or do you take a step back and ask me questions like, okay, in which industry would you like me to consider? What is the goal of launching this, of designing this product? Are we trying to make money? Are we trying to increase engagement? Where does it fall in the overall strategy of the company? Asking those follow-up questions to my very generic ask is trying to scope the ambiguity, and that's what differentiates someone who has done their PM homework from someone who's just kind of like, you know, trying to do it during the interview. And it's also, again, as I mentioned, okay to take a step back and think about it. Frameworks are useful, and you will find quite a few frameworks in cracking the PM interview, in Design and Conquer, Decode and Conquer, and they are helpful, but they're meant to be ways to like remember all the things that you should think about. You shouldn't stick to it like glue. I've had candidates who like literally will say, okay, now that I've gone through the customer pain points, I will now design a couple features that will alleviate these pain points for this and this target market. Like nobody wants to talk to a robot, so don't stick to it like glue. Just use it as something helpful to get the conversation and ideas flowing. Finally, this is something that I wish more candidates did, which is to provide mental guardrails for the interviewer as much as possible. Don't forget that the interviewer is a person as well, and so they may have the tendency to just stop paying attention if the candidate is rambling, which doesn't help for the candidate, which is not helpful for the candidate. And so either saying, okay, I'm going to talk about an experience where I did this as a summary, and then launching into it is a great mental guardrail. Another one is there's 3 ways to look at it, and then do 1, 2, 3. Another one is if you say that the way that I'm going to approach this, the high-level framework I'm going to use is X, Y, Z. And so I'll go into that now. Like that is another mental guardrail. Obviously, you know, going back to the don't stick to it like glue. These mental guardrails are especially helpful when you're doing remote interviewing, especially phone screens, because it forces the interviewer to think about what you're saying and how you're saying it and what it is that you're actually saying, or else it just gets lost, especially when you can't see the person who's talking. A couple more practical tips. The tell me about yourself question is asked in several different ways. It's not as popular as it used to be, but the point isn't to rehash your experience. Starting with, I graduated from college at this year with this degree is not the right way to start. Again, the point is to tell a story. What is the underlying common thread between your experiences? What it is that you're looking to develop? And what is it that what is it that led you to this company? The video that I've posted here is pretty good in terms of how to think about, tell me about yourself. It will, you know, kind of walk you through what are the steps and like how to think about it. I think it prescribes like having like a 2 to 3 minute answer. You want to focus on being concise. So, you know, try to get your tell me about yourself done in less than a minute. Confidence is very important, because if you don't believe in yourself, why would anyone else? It really does differentiate in how you come through in an interview. I know it's difficult to cultivate and you may not always feel it, but this is something that you should try to develop before getting into the interview. It's also important to brag, for sure, because here the interview is all about you, but it's important to give credit when it's deserved, because I found candidates where they brag about all these things that they've done, and as you dive deeper into the details, you find that they didn't actually do as much as they first said that they did, which is a big trust buster during the interview. Finally, product estimation, metric type questions. Do it with a buddy. It makes a difference. Having somebody sit across the aisle from you and quiz you even if it is your friend, really puts you in a different sort of mind frame and is much closer to what will happen in the interview than if you're just doing it by yourself. You're much nicer to yourself than your buddy would be. Well, thank you so much for joining. I hope this was helpful. I know I threw a lot at you, but I wanted to make sure that the advice that I gave was very practical and something that you can follow, and is also based off of mistakes that I've made and mistakes that I've seen candidates make. Thank you for joining.